Welcome to the podcast of All Means All. In this episode, Catherine Reid, Vana Chiou, Merve Ayvalli, and Leslie Ann Webster will talk about school assessment in an inclusive education system.
Hello to all of you. Today we are here, I and three good colleagues from different universities, to discuss about school assessment in inclusive education systems. And the first question I have in my mind is, what do we mean when we say school evaluation in inclusive education system? Catherine, can you help us in that?
I hope so. So there are lots of different kinds of assessment. You could assess an individual pupil. For example, if you were interested in whether they had a learning difference like dyslexia. You could also look on a local or a national or even an international level through tools such as PISA. And of course, you can look in a school level. Now, when we were deciding what kind of assessment we wanted to look at, we thought that perhaps there were some drawbacks with international comparators for inclusion, because of course inclusion doesn't always mean the same thing in the same context. Yes, we have wonderful international resources such as the Salamanca Statement, such as the materials produced by the European Union, which offer some possibilities for a shared understanding of how to understand, how to practice inclusion. But we're also very aware that on a school level, individual schools, individual practitioners within a school will have their own understandings of what inclusion is and how they want to practice it. So when we were deciding on our focus, we thought that what we wanted to look at particularly was how schools do inclusion and how schools find out about their own inclusive practices. If you were a teacher in a school, if you were a head teacher in a school, how would you know what your colleagues thought inclusion was? How would you know what your colleagues were doing that they thought was inclusive practice? And how could you as a school work towards improving your inclusive practice? And so when we decided on the level of school assessment that we were interested in, what we thought we wanted to do was we wanted to look particularly at how school communities can find out more about how inclusive they are. And lastly, and I think this is very important to all of us, we wanted to very much focus on school communities. This is not something that's being done by outside forces. This is not the OECD landing on you and telling you, oh, you're good and inclusive or you're bad and you're not inclusive. This is schools thinking for themselves, and not just teachers either, all sorts of stakeholders in schools. So we want to look at how can pupils and young people be involved in assessing the school's inclusivity? How can the community be involved? How can teachers, not just head teachers, not just management, but every teacher have a voice in what do we think is important in terms of inclusion? How are we doing it just now and how can we do it better?
Thank you very much, Catherine. And the next question comes in my mind based on what you have said till now is, what are the key areas of evaluation, of school evaluation in inclusive education systems? Merve, can you help us in that?
Yeah. System and school evaluation is critical process to decide whether the school is suitable for all the needs of learners. So always we can say many key areas, but we will mention some of them here today. And we can say them such as school environment, staff, curriculum, learners, and family and community also. If we start with school environment, safety is one of the most important indicators. Does the school provide safe learning environment for all learners? And accessibility is also another important area. All the areas of school are accessible to everyone. And we should also mention resources here. Does the school provide necessary resources to support inclusive education practices? And we can continue with the staff like teachers, managers, psychological consultants, and also admin staff. Does the teacher have got enough training in inclusive education? And do the managers have enough skills for leadership to support inclusive education policies and also practices? And do the psychological consultants have skills to meet both social and also emotional needs of learners? And do they have got enough skills for managing crisis also? And do the administrative staff have good communication and also organizational skills? And we should add also professional development of all the staff. And staff should have got opportunities for their continuous professional development and to enhance their inclusive education practices.
Thank you very much, Merve. You mentioned 5 key areas of evaluation, and you also mentioned possible indicators for the first 2 areas you mentioned before. But the third area, if I remember well, is curriculum, and I'm wondering what could be the indicators of evaluation curriculum. Catherine?
So, some questions that you might ask yourself and your colleagues and your school when you're thinking about curriculum. What educational purposes shaped this curriculum? Was inclusion one of those purposes? Does the curriculum fit with the educational purposes that it's meant to be supporting? Another question is whether the curriculum is informed by research in inclusion. And if it is, how current is that research? Are you still using papers from 20, 30, 50, 70 years ago? And if so, are they still relevant? Are they still accurate? Another consideration is, where is the curriculum focused? Does the curriculum focus on the histories and the stories of one group exclusively and shut out all the other groups whose stories and histories might be involved? Does the curriculum include or address historical and ongoing social injustices? Whose voice is included in deciding what's in the curriculum? Do young people have a voice in what's being taught? And finally, how does the curriculum navigate individual differences? Do you have to study certain subjects in certain ways at certain levels, at certain ages, or is there flexibility built into the curriculum? And if you have that flexibility, what safeguards are there to make sure that no one is excluded from any particular kinds of learning, to make sure that everyone has equitable access?
Thank you very much, Catherine. Very good, but 2 more key areas are remaining to analyze and to connect, relate them with possible indicators, and I can see Leslie ready to answer to us. Leslie.
Thank you, Vana. So first of all, we're looking at our most important stakeholders, which is our learners. So I suppose the question for our educators and teachers and schools is, how do we measure the progress of all of our learners to be inclusive and address their own individual learning needs? Alternative assessment, do we provide, or how do we create alternative assessment methods to capture the diverse learning outcomes for all learners? And skills, we're looking outside the skills of our learners, practical, creative, other than academic skills. What about their social skills, their life skills? How can we incorporate that and measure it? Participation, do we develop strategies, or have we got strategies in place that we ensure that all our learners participate in their learning and development? And is there opportunities for your learners to provide feedback on their engagement and participation in the learning process? Again, we move on to engagement, which obviously is, I suppose, a foundation of a good, strong relationship between the school, the teacher and the learner. Is there initiatives embedded into increase and enhancing engagement, or identifying the risk of disengagement of our learners? Can we identify that and put in supports? Do we involve learners to set their own learning goals and to reflect on their progress throughout their time with us? Moving on then to the family and community, which is also a very important stakeholder in the learning process. Is there collaboration and communication between families and the community for the school? Is there methods of communication, different types of methods of communication used? Is it inclusive? How do we keep our families informed? Do we meet all families' needs and learning needs when it comes down to communication and collaboration? Is families' feedback incorporated into the evaluation process and change process in the school? Is there organised events that foster a sense of community and identity and belonging within the school? And how are families and learners supported to engage in these events? Again, moving to the last for families and community is the engagement. How are families engaged in activities in the community? And how do we assess family and community engagement, and how do we develop measures to either enhance it or increase it?
And what's about the process? We have to discuss a little bit about the process. Actually, we covered what school evaluation is. We said some basic key areas of evaluation and possible indicators for that, but I think we have to discuss a little bit about the process of evaluation, and if I can add in this discussion my thoughts and my knowledge to that. The process of evaluation is very important for the consistency and, of course, for the quality of evaluation. In literature, we can find different models of evaluation in different education systems, and this is because they differentiate in different aspects, and this is because it's based on the context of evaluation, of the goals of the school, of the inclusive school, of the mission of the school, and of course if the evaluation is done centrally, for example, if it's guided centrally, or if it's a legislative frame behind it. So if we see different evaluation models for schools, we can recognize three basic phases of evaluation. The first phase always has to do with the planning and the development of the evaluation. The second one has to do with the implementation itself, the implementation of evaluation. And the third one usually has to do with the reflection of the evaluation after the evaluation, and of course with the development of an action plan for improvement. Usually in the first phase, the phase of planning, the school set out the goals, the objectives of the evaluation, what they value as important, what they want to measure, for example, and what's the mission of the school, and then who are the people who can be involved in the evaluation, and what are the tools they are going to use to succeed the evaluation, to proceed to the evaluation. So this is usually are done in the planning phase, and of course what they are going to measure. And then it comes to the implementation phase, usually that it has to do with the gathering of evaluation data and the analyzing of that. And after that, it's the reporting of the data. And then it comes this third phase that has to do with the reflection of the action plan development. School reflects on the evaluation data, on the results of the evaluation, and compares, checks if the data cover the goal of the school, what has been done well, what is missing, what can be improved as to be as inclusive as they can. So there it comes the action plan. And the schools then they try to design an action plan for improvement and then to put it into action. And actually, it's a circular, let's say, process, because actually when they plan the action, they design the action plan for improvement, then they come back to the defining the new goals and coming back to the implementation phase. So it's a very important procedure for quality evaluation, and an evaluation that it's aligned with the goals of an inclusive education system in school. So that's about the process. And before reaching the end, there is a question I want to ask. It will be a little bit tricky, let's say, actually, but I think that we already have discussed a little bit about that. Do we value what we measure, or do we measure what we really value? Is it easy for you, Catherine, to help me in that?
Yes, of course. So, one of the things that can happen, particularly when an outside body enforces a certain kind of school assessment, is that schools will react by paying close attention to what this outside body has asked them to measure. And that can become what they value. Now, sounds all right if the government cares very much about universal literacy and asks schools, please make sure that 97% of your pupils are literate by the age of 10. That sounds good. Not so much if a school reacts by expelling all the illiterate pupils so that they can reach the target. So, outside imposed measures can cause unintended consequences as schools begin to value the measure, trying to meet the measure, rather than thinking about what's behind that measure, which is, of course, usually a good and inclusive goal. By flipping that, we're asking schools to think about, what do you value? When you think about inclusion, what are your principles? What are your values? What are your ideals? What is your ethos? And then, once you've thought about that, how can you use assessment to support you in living up to those ideals? And so that, to come right back in a circle, that is why we think that schools empowered, school communities empowered to design and conduct their own assessment is a really powerful tool for improving inclusive practice.
Thank you for listening to the podcast of All Means All. In the show notes, there is a link to the chapter in the open textbook. There you can find the transcript of the video and more information on the topic.